Thank you all so much for coming. It's great to see so many people I don't recognise in the audience. Thanks for coming to, is it a LARP, is it a wargame? No, it's a megagame. So I'm just going to start by introducing myself. So my name is Becky Campbell-Ladley. In megagaming circles, I'm normally known as BeckyBecky. I've been megagaming since 2014 and I've played around 70, 80 megagames. I've designed 2 games, Everybody Dies, the Game of Thrones megagame, and Trope High, the American high school fantasy megagame. And I'm a blogger at BeckyBecky Blogs, where I blog about both after-action reports of games that I've been to, as well as design pieces and thought pieces about megagames and other immersive games. So I just want to get an idea of who's in the room with me today. If you've been to a megagame before, can you put your hand up? Cool. Okay. These people over here know what I'm going to be talking about, hopefully a bit. Can I get at the other end of the spectrum anyone who, before coming to this talk or seeing this talk's title, hadn't heard of megagames? Awesome. Hopefully you're going to be learning a lot today then. So today I'm going to be talking about what megagames are, and give some examples of games that have run and what the player experience at those has been like, give you advice for attending your first megagame, and signposting you to a few places where you can find out more about megagames. So let's start with what is a megagame. Firstly, it is a very diverse and varied design space, which is why I'm going to be giving some examples later. If I was just to tell you what a megagame is, you probably wouldn't have a great idea of what they actually look like. But here are some things that most of them have in common. So firstly, they are live gaming events with elements of both roleplay and board games and various other things. They are quite large-scale events. They have between 20 and 300 participants. In fact, there's even been a game run with 600 participants, although not all of them were in the same physical location. Most megagames, though, are around 40 to 60 player mark. Prior to COVID, they were exclusively face-to-face games, but since the pandemic, online games have been run, and that's sort of a growing community, and they are all-day events. Players are divided into teams, or factions, or associations of some kind. Players represent a single character, and that could be a named character or it could be a job title. And you'll have a briefing if that's a team or an individual or sometimes both. They're played over multiple game elements, maps, councils, cards, resources, things like that. The rules are flexible and they're open to being adjudicated by facilitators who are normally called control. And that gives rise to things called whizzers, or player actions that are not covered by the rules. The roleplay within them is objective-focused rather than personality-focused, but the theme and the narrative is embedded within the game. It doesn't rely on abstract victory points. The game space is abstract, though, and your real-world position is not directly relevant, and the game is turn-based rather than real-time. So that's got quite a lot in common with a lot of different other game types. LARP and war games, to name 2 of the most common ones, but Model UN, tabletop roleplay, board games, large-scale board games. And I'm not really here to say whether megagames are a distinct game type compared to some of those. A lot of people think there's a lot of overlap with things like LARP. All I'm really here to do is to say that there's these really cool gaming events that are being run called megagames, and you might want to check them out if you're into any of those other types of gaming. So that's what they look like, but so that's what megagames are, but what do they actually look like? So next I'm going to go through some of the most common megagames, and then I'm going to talk about some of the diversity that's in the design space to give you an idea of the breadth of design. Firstly, some of these photos are on Facebook, so they're a bit blurry. So the first game I'd like to talk about is Watch the Skies, which is a set on Earth in the near future. It's probably the most well-known megagame out there. Aliens have arrived, whether that's for a peaceful first contact or as an invasion. Most of the players will be members of the Earth governments and will be roles such as president, foreign minister, defence minister, things like that. But some of the players are aliens, and they'll have an objective that's obscured from the human roles. There are also other player roles, such as corporations and the press. But what are players actually doing at the game? Well, they'll be playing in a variety of sub-games. There's the UN, a council that deals with player crises that arise during the game, whether that's caused by players or inserted by control. There'll be a map, or multiple maps, where players will fight off the aliens or possibly go to war with each other. There might be a research game to get better tech, a requisition game to get things from the corpse. There might even be a spy game, and you'll have resources to trade. Money, raw materials, alien artifacts, technology. The press will be circulating key information and interesting stories, and the aliens will have their own sub-games to interact with, but they'll also be interacting with the human ones, such as on the maps, or maybe trying to get a seat on the UN. And talking. Have I mentioned talking? 90% of your megagame experience is talking to other players, making deals with them, making alliances, making enemies. Watch the Skies was first run in 2014, and that had about 30 players. But gaming content creators, Shut Up and Sit Down, came to that run and made a video. And we want to get a real view into what going to a mega game is like. I definitely recommend checking out that video. It's on YouTube. Shut Up and Sit Down, play a goddamn mega game. Go watch it, it's great. As you can imagine, after they came and did that, it did blow up a little bit on social media, which is why Watch the Skies is such a common game nowadays. In 2014, as I said, it had 30 players, but it's now been run with up to 300 players, as you can see on the screen. And it's been run on every continent, except, I think, Antarctica. But we'll get there someday. Next, please.
Has it been played in space?
I'll check. I don't think so yet, but that sounds great. So the next game I'd like to talk about is another really common one called Den of Wolves. Have people seen Battlestar Galactica or played the board game?
Yeah.
It's based on that. You are playing as the last surviving humans, following a war with the wolves. You are fleeing through space in the survivor fleet, being chased by the wolves, but there are wolf traitors on board. Fundamentally, this is a very solvable game. All the players, mostly, want the same thing, to survive. But the existence of those traitors, just 2 or 3 in a game of about 50, means that players really struggle to communicate, and that's where the fun comes in. Player teams are ships, like the Icebreaker, which is a mining vessel, the Shepherd, food production, and the Aegis, the battleship. And they produce different resources in different amounts. So trading is essential. Player roles include captain, who leads the team, chief engineer, who manages the on-ship resources, and council member, who attends a fleet-wide council every turn. There's also the Star Alpha, which is where the president of the entire fleet is, and, like in Watch the Skies, there's the press. Mechanics would be things like trading, naturally, resource generation, and the council, which makes decisions that affect the entire fleet. I also want to take a moment here to talk about whizzers, which I mentioned during the definition part of what megagame is. These are actions that players can take that fall outside the rules. Part of megagames is creating a realistic open-world environment for players to act in, and that's where whizzers come in. In Den of Wolves, this could be something like poisoning another player, that happened to me, hiding comms equipment in a teammate's bunk, sabotaging a ship system, or hiding supplies that you promised another player and saying they've gone missing and you don't know where they are and you definitely don't still have them. Basically anything that the game designer didn't think was going to happen in the game, didn't plan for, the facilitator team will help players achieve. This is one of the most well-known games because it was actually converted to being run online fairly early during the pandemic, and this is actually a picture of one of the press briefings during one of the online runs. And nowadays you will find both physical and online versions of the game. So those are 2 of the most well-known mega games, but that really doesn't give you an idea of the breadth, so I'm going to go on to talk about a few more games that are all quite different to these. On that note, a lot of mega games are only run a single time or no more than once a year. It's very rare to see the same game be repeatedly played in the same area in a short space of time. So if you do see a game that piques your interest, I definitely recommend signing up because you don't know when it will be back. So, next please. The first of these other games that I'd like to talk about is called The Spanish Rose. This is a historical, political, military game set in Renaissance Europe. These historical games are quite a common type of mega game, and for a long time they were the most common. And player characters in this game included Elizabeth I, William of Orange, and Catherine de' Medici. Teams are made up of the most influential political and military figures within Europe at the time, and players are trying to establish a legacy for themselves and also ensure the succession for their entire country. Religious discord plays a key role. This is not long after the Reformation of the Church in England, and this is playing out across Europe, where Catholics and a few different types of Protestants are all vying for power, not to mention the Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. A big difference between this game and the previous ones is that players are named characters rather than job roles. So, for example, I had the amazing role of Elizabeth I. And roleplay is still objective focused, but there's a bit of personality coming into it, so I took great pleasure in refusing to marry. Speaking of which, marriage, having children, death, all of those are mechanised elements of the game. There's also sub-games like land and sea warfare and trade. But next, let's talk about something a little bit different. Not Over by Christmas, which is on this bit of paper. Not Over by Christmas is an operational military game, which is very far down the wargaming end of the megagame spectrum, if you like to think of it like that. It's set during the Cold War, but it's gone hot. The Soviets have invaded West Germany. Players will be either on the NATO or the Warsaw Pact team, and they'll be playing anything from high command all the way down to individual corps. Next, please. High command are setting the strategic goals for their side and communicating those to the rest of their players. Meanwhile, the frontline players are taking those strategic objectives and making tactical decisions based on the situation on the ground. Although there is a rigid hierarchical structure in the game, because it's the army, players really do have the freedom to make decisions based on the information that they have themselves. When I played this game, I was Supreme Allied Commander Europe, big boss of NATO basically, and a personal highlight or lowlight was ordering a warning shot nuke to try and stop the Warsaw Pact from advancing all the way to the River Rhine. It didn't go very well. The final game I'd like to talk about is called Trope High, and it's one of my own designs. It couldn't be more different to Not Over by Christmas. It's set in an American high school, but the type that you see on TV, with really hardcore cliques, very abstracted lessons, and every player's got a secret. They could be a secret witch, a time traveller, a superhero, a spy. They will be taking part in their cliques, and that's the main mechanics. There's no map game. The majority of the mechanics are within the cliques. For example, the drama club will be playing a variant on charades. The cheerleaders are playing a subterfuge-inspired card game, and the sport ballers are playing coin football. And then there's mechanics for the secret roles as well. If you're a werewolf or a vampire, you might be doing an attack during the night. And if you're an avatar of good and evil, you're playing a never-ending game of Connect 4. Players have to divide their actions each turn, their effort, between investing in their lessons or doing well in their cliques, all while trying to keep their cred high by dating their crush, doing well in their cliques, and becoming prom royalty. At the end of the game, they'll find out if they've got into their dream college based on the results of their finals. Of course, some of the players were trying to summon Cthulhu by graduation, so they probably didn't revise. This is just a few examples of the many different games out there. There's all of this and everything in between, so whatever your interests are, whatever fandom you're into, whatever genre you're into, there might be a mega game run for it. But before I tell you how to find out if there is one that you'd be interested in, I want to give you some advice for your first game. So first off, you'll be sent the briefing materials ahead of the game. This will be a rule handbook, your personal briefing, and you're going to be taught this. You're not going to be taught these during the game. You're expected to turn up having read through them. However, control are there if you get stuck, need reminding of something, you get confused. The briefing is really fun and flavourful, but it also contains the crucial objectives that you'll be walking towards during the game. Bring the essentials. Pen and paper you'll almost certainly need. The game doesn't break for lunch, so bring something to eat and stay hydrated. Snacks to bribe other teams with also always go down really well. And just a quick note on costumes, they are completely optional, but they can be a really cool way to get into character, particularly if you find a way to do it something with the rest of your team. If you're worried about being a newbie, please don't. you won't be the only one there, and the community is super welcoming. Often there's a role called new player liaison, new player control, something like that, that's there to help you if you get stuck. And it's also good to mention to your team if it's your first game, because lots of experienced players are really good at giving you opportunities to get involved. And don't run off when the game ends. The real debrief is in the pub afterwards. My final bit of advice is to mentally prepare for the game. Mega games can be pretty intense. They go for the whole day. There's not any breaks. If something big happens, you can normally nip off, have 5 minutes to yourself, but the game's not going to pause or wait for you. And you're going to be spending a lot of the time talking to people, maybe putting pressure on people. It can get intense, so just prepare yourself for that ahead of time. So, where to find games to attend? The first place that I recommend going is the Megagame Assembly website, megagameassembly.com. It's got a game calendar of all online, UK-based and international games, and it's also got some cool stuff like a blog and a podcast. As I mentioned, the shut up and sit down video is also really good to have a look at if you want to really see what a mega game looks like. And then you'll want to check if there's a mega game community local to you. There are ones in many of the major cities in the UK, not actually Birmingham currently, but London, Reading, Bristol, Swindon, Leeds, Manchester, Newcastle, Edinburgh, Glasgow, they're all over the place. But there's also independent games being run, so have a look at Mega Game Assembly, it'll list everything. That's it from me. Thanks very much for coming. I hope that that's given you a good insight into the many and varied mega games that are out there, and that you're now excited to attend your first one, if it would be a first one. I'm going to take some questions in just a sec, or you can come up to me after I finish answering questions if you want to ask something more specific, or you can find me on most social media at BeckyBecky Blogs, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., or on my website, BeckyBeckyBlogs.com. You can also check out my blog where I talk about lots of mega games, and you can contact me through there as well. But I'll take any questions now if anyone's got any. Yeah?
Right. I'm really sorry because I've driven down from Manchester, so I missed the very beginning. Did you talk about the origins of mega games?
I didn't actually, no.
I claim that it was Sandhurst and my very dear friend Dr. Paddy Griffith running a huge game on the Battle of Britain, which actually included some veterans of the Battle of Britain. But you might think otherwise. If you do, I'm interested.
I've always heard that the first mega game was Memphis Mangler, which was a Paddy Griffith one. Probably not the same one, but I don't know too much. There is a really fantastic talk about the origins of mega gaming called From Memphis Mangler to Watch the Skies, which you can find on YouTube, on the MegaCon YouTube. So
I'll look there.
Yeah?
I think Memphis was later, but
Okay.
could be wrong.
Anything else?
Thanks.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, you said it's turn-based. On
Yes.
average, how long? Is it like an hour turn, or is it shorter or longer?
I've seen everything from 15-minute turns up to an hour. I think most are probably between 20 and 45 minutes, probably slightly at the shorter end, but it really depends on the game. In Everybody Dies, turns were 45 minutes, and in Trope High, I think they were half an hour.
So I'm curious about the end, like, so I assume you win or lose as a team, right? But then do most games have like points that each team is awarded? And whoever has the highest points win, or is it just whoever meets objectives and it's you either won or you didn't? Or how does that
So most mega games don't have winners or losers. It's a very individual thing, and it's kind of for people to argue about after the game ends as to whether they met their objectives better than other people. So yeah, it's a very individual thing. You do sometimes have games, especially sort of like the more two-sided war-based ones, where one team will, well, try to claim overall victory. But for example, in Not Over by Christmas, I still tell Chris, who was my opposing player on the Warsaw Pact team, that I beat him. No one agrees with me, but I'm assuming it's true. Yeah?
Do you have any advice that you would give to someone that potentially wanted to get into writing and running mega games, particularly and thinking about the contrast between writing and running mega games versus writing and running LARP?
Good question. So I would say reaching out to community is really good. There's people in mega gaming are very, very generous with their time and their expertise. There's a lot of places where you can go. There's various Discord forums. So there's megacom one, which I help run. There's a few other ones online where people will help you bounce around ideas. There's lots of resources out there available, or a growing number of resources, maybe rather than lots, on websites like Megagame Assembly, my blog. There's another blog called No Game Survives. There's loads of information out there, and also a lot of designers tend to be quite happy to send over rulebooks if you think something in their design could be useful for yours. A lot of people are quite happy to share that sort of expertise, but reaching out to the community is probably the main thing I'd suggest.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher and I've always been quite interested in the prospect of running a mega game at a school for kids. Is that something that you think is A, possible, and B, do resources exist to be able to, for me to just pick up something and then get to work basically trying to run it at school?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there are some people who have run mega games in schools. There's a company called Story Living Games that does that. And then there's also lots of free resources, free mega game resources available online. There's some on the Megagame Assembly website, and some other mega games that are already existing are available for sale online. So there is a lot of stuff out there that you can look into picking up. But yeah, check out Story Living Games and the Megagame Assembly website.
Brilliant, thank you.
That's a great idea.
What's your favourite mega game?
My favourite mega game. So yeah, I play quite a few, and it's really hard to pick one favourite. One very top one would be a game called Mirror Shades by a designer called Alex Beck. It's a cyberpunk mega game, and you're playing as either a corporation or a runner. The corporations are trying to amass power and money and importance, and the runners are trying to bring them down a bit and steal from them. But it's got a really strong political game in it as well, and it's also got a really strong culture game, so you can actually use in-world money to buy accessories you can wear on the day. Costumes for it are always fantastic, and the mechanics are really solid as well, so probably that if I had to name one. Oh, right back.
Why did you decide to design your own games? Was it a reason, were you liking something in the games you have played before?
I think right from when I went along to my first one, I was getting ideas as to how I thought I could do it. I think everyone goes along to games, or maybe not everyone, but I went along to games and thought, oh, this would be really cool, and I can apply this thing from this game to this idea, because my first design was based on Game of Thrones, and I was like, I could take these things from these political history games, but add these elements of fantasy in, and do things a little bit differently. But really it was just, I had an idea for a way that things could be run. I wanted to see if it would work, and apparently it did, because people seem to have enjoyed it. But yeah, I saw a few more hands.
You've touched on costuming.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that that's common, uncommon, or rare to see within games?
Most games have some people in costume. Most games, I would probably say, don't have more than half the people in costume. That's just a very, very broad guess. Some games lend themselves to costume a lot more easily. Historical ones, where you're dressed up in like very heavy clothes and it's quite hard to source, can be a bit harder, whereas if you've got something like cyberpunk and a lot of people have something neon in their wardrobe, maybe not a lot of people, I've got a lot of neon in my wardrobe, but or can find it a bit easier. But yeah, most games have at least a couple of people, probably very few games have the majority.
Do you find that set dressing helps at all, or is that just something that's not done?
It's not been particularly done a lot. It is always a nice touch when you see people doing it. Probably one of the most common things for things like that would be big flags up in the room for the tables, but it's not particularly common. Another really cool thing is if you're going and you're playing as a country is to take food from that country, so that when people come over to like the France table, you can offer them some brie or something. So.
You said it's an all-day affair. How many hours usually last for?
So most games tend to start around 10 AM and then run through to about 4 or 5 PM. Is that like 6 or 7 hours? They do vary quite a bit, and I know there have been significantly shorter ones. But yeah.
When it comes to kind of manuals and documentation on how these things run? Is it more kind of open source or free access, or is it kind of a reach out to the developers and see if they're willing to give you access, just for like browsing through things and looking at mechanics and such?
It does vary across it. There are some rule sets that are available completely open on the internet. In a lot of cases, you will be reaching out to the designers specifically. Yeah, it's quite varied depending on the designer mostly. Oh, yeah.
So, when you've got a character, do you normally get told ahead of time what kind of character, or is it you read the rules, you turn up on the day, and then you get like the information about like who you're playing, or do you get to pick is it assigned to you, or is it?
Yeah. So normally cast lists are released anywhere between a month to a week before the game. So you will find out who you are ahead of time, and you'll normally get your briefing ahead of time as well, so you'll get to find out about who you are, what your motivations are. Sometimes you get it on the day, particularly if it's sort of like a lot of secret objectives and they don't want people to be chatting about them ahead of the game, but more often you'll get it in advance. A lot of games, you'll fill in a casting questionnaire and then you'll be assigned to a role. Some games allow you to pick what role you want to be. Some games just assign you more at random to a role, but most, I would say, use casting questionnaire. Anything else? Cool. Well, as I said, if you do have any more questions later, this is where you can find me, or you can come up and have a chat now. I could talk about megagames for hours, as you can probably guess. But thank you all so much for listening to me. It's been a pleasure.